Red, white and boom. 3D. Raise. Total War RTD. If all these sound like gibberish to you, well, you're not alone. However, you probably recognize names like V, or Red Bull, Monster, Prime, and of course, Mother. All of these are energy drinks. Energy drinks are a regular feature of our beverage consumption culture. They're drunken by tradies, athletes, and urban youths all around the world. If you're listening to this podcast while driving long distance, there's a pretty good chance there's an energy drink in your center console right now. But energy drinks are also consumed by teenagers, high school students who may not drink caffeine in more grown-up forms like tea or coffee, but are more than happy to down a can of Mother with their mates. If you're a parent, then you've likely had your own reservations about your kids consuming these sugary drinks. There's lots of caffeine, not to mention all the other ingredients. If you look at the average can, you'll see things like guarana, taurine, ginseng, and other ingredients that might make you think twice. And that's not even to mention the sugar content. What's the deal with energy drinks? To find out, we talked to Dr. Christiana Laimena-Lane. Christiana is a health expert and a friend of the show. I asked her whether we should be scared of these exotic ingredients. How much caffeine and sugar are we really ingesting when we drink energy drinks? And ultimately, are they the health supplements some companies market them as? Or is there a better alternative out there? This is Science Radio, episode 207. Energy drinks, delicious or deadly? Welcome to another episode of Science Radio. My name's Jesse, and I'm joined by Dr. Christiana Laimena-Lane. You have recently wrote for us, again, another fantastic, learned, academic, yet accessible article about energy drinks. The last time you talked to us was about gut health, and now we're talking about energy drinks. Where to start? Because I feel energy drinks are just sort of a part of the beverage consumption culture in Australia, and has been for quite some time. I think a lot of people are either probably coffee drinkers or energy drink drinkers because they kind of serve the same purpose in a way. A lot of coffee aficionados would probably be very upset to hear me say that. But at their core, they give us the energy, the pep, the get up and go to be able to drive long distances, to stay awake when we need to, all that sort of stuff. So when we're talking about energy drinks, could you kind of paint a picture for us about what is the landscape of energy drinks in Australia, but perhaps even further abroad if you want to touch on that? What is available? What is being sold? Why are they so popular? All that sort of thing.
Yeah, look, energy drinks are popular based on various reasons and factors on marketing. Even coffee drinking has become kind of like almost it's a hip thing.
Absolutely.
Right. I'll see you at the cafe, or I'll see you there over at the coffee cart. And it's become a culture on its own. So energy drink is also something that adolescents are taking on because they're wanting to look cool because of the marketing that also comes with it. And I think that marketing has been targeting the adolescent age, young adults, and so many children and adolescents are actually taking on the energy drinks. Apparently in market in Australia, it has increased. I mentioned in the article, based on a report, that there was a growth of 15%, and that was during 2020, so it can actually increase even more. And also there was a study by Telethon Kids Institute in 2019 that surveyed about 36,000 high school students and their energy drink consumption. And they found that many of them, like half, have actually tried drinking energy drinks. And unfortunately, some of them, like half of that, have actually found that there have been some side effects that come with it, like heart palpitations, headache, insomnia. Nevertheless, it's something that a lot of adolescents are taking on and also are testing out with its consumption. Could also be more young adults consuming it with alcohol.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, people want to have energy, but sometimes it's not necessarily the energy. It could be the flavor.
Yes.
And it could also be everybody's drinking it. I might as well also drink it. And promotion trucks that come and promote these different events. And whether it's a sports event or a concert, and they're everywhere in terms of its marketing.
That's an interesting point because as you mentioned, it's everywhere in terms of, I think there's actually some really interesting parallels between energy drinks and sport and gambling and sport, right? They're both very profitable industries.
Yes.
But I mean, when a lot of people think Red Bull, they think, was it the biking, like trail biking or like a Formula One team or whatever, like there's a definite brand association there and that's not accidental, that's on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's targeted groups, I guess, in terms of peer pressure too. It's not just peer pressure on drinking alcohol, but also if everybody else is also drinking this, it must be really good. And it must taste really good. And it may not necessarily be. There's so many different varieties now that are being sold.
Is it a gateway drug in terms of like drinking alcohol? Because you mentioned in the article, and you've already mentioned before, that people mix them together, whether they're drinking a swig of Red Bull and then having, I don't know, beer or I don't know what it would be, but is it a gateway drug or is it just something that's associated with or something that people drink with alcohol sort of thing?
People don't necessarily realize that when you combine the two, what happens when you, let's say, drink the energy drink because it's got caffeine in it, and then you drink alcohol, the impact of the alcohol in terms of the brain function and understanding just the experience of it is actually masked with the caffeine content. And so people are thinking, well, I can drink more because I don't feel as drowsy. I don't feel as if it wasn't actually, if there was no caffeine consumption initially. So that has been something that people have noted in terms of why there is this mix so you can actually last longer in a sense, quote and unquote. So that's why it can be actually very dangerous because some people don't metabolize caffeine very well.
Right.
And they get very jittery with even a small amount of caffeine. And so I think it really just depends on how much your body can take. And you don't know until you actually experience the bad side effect of it. I've heard of different cases of people taking some energy drinks or even coffee and then mixing alcohol with it, and then they get the impact of severe dehydration. They have heart palpitation and fainting. But that's really more of the severe case when people are not able to process and metabolize the caffeine very well, or even mixing it together.
Yeah, I was going to say not everybody can absorb alcohol the same way.
That's
so
right.
you put those two things together and there's potentially a pretty dodgy result could happen.
That's right.
That's crazy. I know one of the things that, at least when energy drinks were first introduced, was the fear around these strange sounding ingredients that get put into the energy drinks. Things like ginseng or guarana or taurine. And I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of others as well. These are probably people who are a bit ignorant, have never heard of these things before. I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of people who are like, yes, we've used this for ages, but what are some of the more common ingredients that you typically will see in energy drinks? Why are they in there, first of all? And are they safe, Dr. Christiana? Are they safe?
Well, I think it comes back down to what's actually the content, because it varies from one brand to another. And they often contain B vitamins, which, when you look at B vitamins, that's pretty awesome. Kind of like the BBBB Barocca gives you back the BB bounce in a sense. Now, it must be something good. And I think that's why in the US, it's been marketed more as a dietary supplement rather than it being a soft drink. So that's why the regulation has actually been a little bit kind of murky in terms of like how much of the content. So the caffeine, usually there is a certain amount of caffeine that is allowed in Australia, and you can't actually have, I think the maximum, that's right, by law the energy drink must contain no more than 32 milligrams of caffeine per 100 ml. And so other brands have, and if you compare it to, for example, Coca-Cola, so they contained about 9.7 milligrams per 100 ml, so double that and a half in a 250 ml can. Now, there is different varieties, like as I mentioned, and different size bottles as well. You know, Red Bull tends to be a little bit smaller, and then there's like the Mother, which is like a lot bigger. And so what it contains is caffeine. And secondly, it contains the B vitamins, and then there's also taurine. And taurine is amino acid. And actually, our body produces a level of taurine. It processes bile acids and regulates calcium release, balance fluids, salts and minerals, gives you energy, reduces your stress. So
wow, so the more the better.
So it's got good things. The taurine can actually be very good, and in fact, athletes have used taurine as a way to improve their aerobic performance.
Okay.
And so there's different like safe levels of taurine. Now, we don't necessarily know how much of this is long term in terms of like mixing with other things, whether or not it's actually okay. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to testing whether or not it's actually good in a younger age group, a lot of the research has been based more on adults because you can't actually do it on the younger groups of like adolescents, etc.
And yet they're the ones who are primarily drinking it.
It's a bit of a conundrum.
Yeah.
But so taurine, there are many good things about taurine, but there's still a lot more research that needs to be done in terms of like the dosage for the supplementation of it. Then there is also guarana, and guarana is a caffeine. It contains a lot more caffeine than coffee beans.
Okay.
And so it can be up to 4 to 6 times more caffeine than coffee beans. Yes, it's actually just from this plant. It's like a Brazilian plant.
Okay.
So it's a stimulant. I remember I was writing a paper for university and I took a whole bunch of guarana stuff because I knew that it contains a lot more caffeine. And this is me realizing I don't drink coffee anymore, and because I don't really rely on energy from coffee where I used to before. But this was like me taking this on, and I could still remember just the jitteriness that I experienced just because I was just taking so much of it. But, guarana is readily available. You can grab it from the store, pharmacies and that. And so that's been added to as an additional sort of like caffeine content, I guess. And then just ginseng as well. And ginseng has been used like as a herb in Chinese medicine. And it's known to have these antioxidant, anti-inflammatory properties. So there are some, in a sense, like good things that are added as additives to the drink. And I think that's why there have been brands like in the US, they would say, it's really more of a dietary supplement.
Yeah, I'm not hearing, these are chemicals that are going to go into your bloodstream and destroy your platelets or, cause you to go into complete hyper, whatever. They sound like, number one, naturally occurring. So you could get them potentially as a supplement, and people clearly have over the years. But I guess if I'm hearing you correctly, the real danger is how much is used and how it is mixed with other chemicals.
Yes. I think I'm more worried about the caffeine content, particularly that young children and young teenagers are actually drinking because you're guzzling it down. It's a can. You're treating it as though this is like a soft drink.
It's a fizzy drink, yeah.
It's a fizzy drink.
Yeah.
And when it's a fizzy drink, you can just guzzle it down as however you want. And remembering that it's actually an enormous amount of caffeine. It could be, depending on the size, it could be just 1 cup of coffee or it could be 2, depending on how many they're also taking.
Yeah.
So I think it's an awareness for others to know that to not treat it as a soft drink.
Right.
It's different to a soft drink.
It's a different category altogether. And I think in the general sort of zeitgeist, we kind of all agree Coca-Cola's, some people like it, but we all kind of agree, yeah, it's probably not that good for you, right? Where
Yes.
it's certainly not marketed as a health product. As much as the Coca-Cola company might wish that were the case, but with energy drinks, it's different. So could we because I think this is interesting, a lot of people probably their, I guess, baseline understanding of this is probably rooted in coffee because that's, I think, far more well accepted and well known. So let's talk about if you're going to a cafe now and let's say you get, a flat white, right? You're getting maybe 2 shots of coffee, one or 2 shots of coffee. You're getting milk, maybe some. If you're in New Zealand, you'll either get cinnamon sugar or you'll get like a chocolate powder on top, which is not really that well seen here in Australia, but I do have fond memories of that. And yes, full confession time. I'm asking you to tell me about the bad stuff in caffeine. So I thought I'd just get that out there. But let's compare. So, you're going to a cafe, you're getting a flat white or a latte. It might have 1 or 2 shots of coffee in it, plus some milk and some extra stuff. Okay? Right next to you, your teenager is hoofing down a can of, let's say, Mother, right? I mean, I'm not picking on Mother specifically. In terms of what you're getting out of it and what it's doing to you, I know we're talking in we have to talk in very broad terms because I know that, you said that, 1 can of Red Bull is not the same as 1 can of Mother. Different sizes are different, ingredients, all that sort of stuff. But in general terms, if we're comparing the two of them, what are the differences and what is the same?
Okay, so in Mother energy drink, that contains 320 milligrams of caffeine. And in percolated coffee, coffee generally, it's about 100 milligrams of a caffeine.
So roughly 3 times.
In a cup.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
And Mother is, I think, one of the biggest ones in terms of its size.
Yes. We should be fair. Like a mug of coffee is probably, if we're being generous, maybe half the size.
Yeah.
If we're being generous.
Yeah. Generally it's like 250 ml.
Sure.
Yeah. In a cup.
And so you can choose whether you want sugar or not in your coffee.
That's right.
You could add a dairy product if you choose, or a plant-based.
Soy milk or oat milk or almond or whatever.
Let's talk about sugar then. Okay, so you might add 1 or 2 teaspoons of sugar to your coffee. What's sort of the sugar content that we're talking about for a lot of these drinks?
Okay, so if you have 1 teaspoon of sugar, that's about 4 grams of sugar, and in Mother energy drink, and there are 51 grams.
That's almost 5 times, between 4 and 5 times the amount.
That's right. And let's say if it's the original one, it's 160 milligrams per 500 mil of caffeine. And so it's very high. Interestingly, though, it's also one that is very, very popular. Mother has been the top drink, and then followed by, this is based on a CanStar Blue survey, and looking at Mother as the top drink, and then followed by V, and then Monster Energy, and then Red Bull. So yeah, that's the comparison.
That's crazy.
And whereas Red Bull is a lot less in terms of its size, and
so it's more like you're getting a small hit of something versus, I think the bigger the can, sort of, I guess more the perception that this is a fizzy drink that I can consume for fun.
Yes.
Versus I'm getting a little Red Bull because I need a quick fix and that's it. It might taste good, but I'm doing it primarily for the pragmatic effect that it's going to give me.
Correct.
Yeah. One thing that we were talking about before, which I found really interesting, is that as bad as that might sound, Mother and Red Bull, these brands aren't even the worst, because there was recently a brand that was banned in Australia called Prime.
Yes.
This was big.
That's right.
And I was actually in Costco the other day. This is a couple of weeks ago now. It's been banned for like a year almost now, apparently, in Australia, and I'm still seeing it on shelves of people trying to sell it. That's pretty I'm not going to say where, maybe I shouldn't say where I was looking, but I just happened to see it and I thought, oh, that's a bit interesting. I didn't know that we were still allowed to buy that. So what was the big deal with Prime?
Yeah, I think the big deal with Prime is, well, look, it was really popular because of the YouTubers' personalities, I guess, that have actually promoted it. But it actually contained more caffeine in the bottle, more than what is allowed in Australia. They actually contain about 200 milligrams of caffeine per bottle. The energy drinks in Australia cannot have any more than 32 milligrams of caffeine per 100 ml. Prime Energy has 200 milligrams of caffeine in that bottle. So basically, it has gone over the amount of caffeine that's allowed according to food and standard drinks in Australia and New Zealand.
And so because the regulation in the UK and the US is different to here, it's okay there, but it may not be okay here sort of thing.
Yes, and I think it's because of the fact that quite a number of the brands, they go under dietary supplement rather than it being a soft drink.
Interesting.
So that allowed them to be able to sell the drink with varying degrees of caffeine within a certain amount in the bottle.
Yeah. Okay, well, one thing that I wanted to also drill down on a little bit, I feel like it's good for our conversation. Let's talk about caffeine specifically. Because I think one of the things that we probably all kind of accept these days is that caffeine is possibly one of the most well-accepted and widely disseminated psychoactive drugs that people consume. It's a mind-altering substance, right?
It is, yes.
Could you tell us sort of what is it that caffeine does and why is it potentially a concern?
Okay, so
give me lots of guilt.
There is a lot of, well, I don't know if I want to give you lots of guilt. I want to be able to give you maybe some of the understanding of how it acts.
Cool.
And there are some things that have been found to be quite good because some people would say that it contains antioxidants, that it will also help with a number of different things, like some people with diabetes actually respond very well. It reduces the blood sugar. And so it really depends on individuals as well, because not everyone responds uniformly to caffeine. And one thing that I want to share is that oftentimes people say, because it's a stimulant, but actually, it's not really a stimulant if you look at it physiologically, because what caffeine does is it competes with basically adenosine and tries to grab onto the adenosine receptor. And adenosine is released when your energy has been consumed. It's triggered that we need to release adenosine. It's time for you to actually slow down. It's time for you to rest. And what caffeine does is that it goes, get away adenosine, and so it lands onto the adenosine receptors. And so there's different receptors that it lands to. So while the adenosine is released, it actually then mimics, in a sense, to the brain that I can still keep going because I don't feel so tired anymore because the adenosine hasn't acted onto the receptors. So it is really more of like a sleep, maybe I wouldn't say a stimulant is probably the best word for it, but it is more like it's a sleep blocker, I guess, maybe.
Right. So essentially what you're saying is caffeine,
it makes you less sleepy.
It tricks your brain into thinking you're not tired.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
And so your body then just feels more exhilarated because it increases your, you feel more awake and you feel more sort of like ready to continue. I used to drink coffee before and I know what that feels like. And it also helps me to be more regular in a sense.
Yep.
I used to wake up and I would drink the coffee and I eat my cereal and I would go straight to the toilet and I was happy to come out of there thinking that routine was there. Yep. I was very regular. But as soon as I stopped drinking coffee, I was not able to release actually.
Yep.
And it was very difficult for me for about a couple of weeks and for my body to actually then come back again to normal. Yep. And so I think it comes back down to oftentimes people are thinking of okay, I want to have more energy. And coffee is like the answer for it. And it's a quick fix. Yeah, exactly. But it is not actually, I wouldn't say it's always the best fix because it depends really whether or not you can handle it. Now, for those who are pregnant, those who are breastfeeding, it's advised that there is a reduction of the caffeine that you can actually have because there is a reduction of the enzyme that processes caffeine. And so because of that, it also is advisable that pregnant women and those who are nursing, either you stop the caffeine or you actually reduce the amount. And so because it also crosses the placenta into the fetus, it exposes the fetus, and the fetus doesn't actually have these enzymes to be able to process the caffeine. So it will actually last a lot longer in the fetus. And so it is hard to understand how long, whether or not there is a long-term effect later on with the child that has been exposed to high amounts of caffeine.
Wow.
So that's why there is this, I guess, limitations for pregnant women.
And I guess the other thing with coffee is every coffee drinker knows that for every coffee high, there's a coffee low a couple hours after.
Yes, that withdrawal aspect, that symptoms where you start to feel, it's about 4 to 6 hours the half-life of coffee and of caffeine. And so you got to have it again to be able to keep that momentum going because you sense like I was feeling better before and now I'm not feeling as good. And so therefore I must drink it again. And so there are actually, it is a quick fix pretty much.
And it is addictive.
And yes, it can be very addictive and not necessarily, you become really dependent upon it.
Yeah.
It's like for myself before, and it might be different for someone else, I was really relying on it to remain regular. It gives me calmness because I equal it in my brain that if I drink this, I feel good. And therefore, if I feel good, I feel more energized. And I can also go to the toilet. And, if I've got all of those things set in the morning, I'm good to go.
Yeah.
So there is that, dependence aspect. So there are some withdrawal symptoms with headache, fatigue, depressed mood, irritability, nausea. And some people actually get this muscle pain or stiffness with withdrawal symptoms or even vomiting. And caffeine is considered to be a modest risk factor for chronic daily headaches. It disrupts sleep, especially if you drink it later in the day. So if you're going to drink caffeine, it's better to drink it in the more in the morning rather than later in the day. Some people don't feel like it impacts their sleep, but you don't know until you really checked whether or not it interferes with your sleep. So whether or not you can actually get into the deep sleep. And there is also a number of things with increased heart rate and blood pressure, and people go into arrhythmia with caffeine intake. And another thing that has been found in some studies that looked at caffeine, it actually reduces the activation of your prefrontal cortex area.
Oh, wow.
And that means that if you want someone to share something like a secret or to, because it's a relaxant, it's not sort of, because it reduces the activity in the prefrontal cortex, and prefrontal cortex is where there is judgment. You have an understanding of reasoning a lot clearer. You want to make very clear judgment of what's right and what's wrong. That can actually be inhibited and be clouded in terms of whether or not should I be saying this or should I not be saying this. And so there have been, if you're wanting to make a business deal, let's have a cup of coffee and, let's see how we can actually have, more of this. Yeah, I guess it actually clouds your judgment in a sense.
Bad life tip for everybody. You want to manipulate somebody, give them a cup of coffee.
Yeah, give them a cup of coffee. Yeah, or they'll gossip more in a sense.
Loose lips and make you think bad.
Yes. So I think that's where it's sort of like, I guess, some of those things that are actually negative about it. But even more so, like some people get anxiety, they get jitteriness, and they get upset stomach. It dehydrates you. It ages your skin a lot more.
Really?
And so I just mentioned some of the negative, but there are some positive things like, It improves your vigilance, obviously, your attention, and it allows you to, I guess, perform tasks a lot quicker. And whether or not that's actually more accurate is something else, but it just allows you to be able to perform a lot quicker. And it can also increase your serotonin dopamine release in the brain, somewhat mimicking the effects that's caused by antidepressants. So it makes you feel more energetic and more social. And then there is also some other positive side with caffeine where 4 cups of coffee per day showed a relative risk of gallstone formation. And
wow. I mean, 4 cups a day is a lot.
That's right. This is just some studies, older studies that have shown this, and even reducing your low risk of colon cancer. So there's like a mixed response in terms of the impact of caffeine. Another study looked at maybe perhaps it will lower the risk of developing Parkinson's disease. Now, I think a lot more studies need to be done to show really what the impact of caffeine does long term, and especially with children as well, because there is a risk of the fact that I wouldn't say it's a definitive conclusion, but it may lead to some mood disorders in children who are taking caffeine.
I think this is what it really comes down to, right? Because if you're an adult and you want to drink a cup of coffee or even an energy drink, right, that's kind of your choice at the end of the day. But I think for the parents who are listening to this, there's an added responsibility of I don't just have my health to think about, I have the health of my child or teenager to think about as well. And if they're guzzling down, sometimes 2 to 3 times the amount of caffeine that they would if they were drinking a cup of coffee every day, plus they're getting a bunch of other chemicals in their drink that may or may not be good, but together we don't quite know exactly how it all works and what the long-term effects are. That's a pretty scary proposition.
Yeah. Look, if you list down some of these things all together on the side effects of caffeine, and you don't actually realize what it is, that it is it is coffee, for example, right? And you just sort of give someone a drink. This may cause you to have these things. You almost want to think, if you look at those labels, you go, do I really want to have this?
It's like the labels that we see on cigarettes.
Do I need to have this?
Yeah.
And I think this is where it comes back down to energy. How much energy do we need? And how can we actually get better energy? Because your mitochondria in your cells are the ones that are actually pumping this ATP, which is the currency of energy in your cells. And the more that you can help your mitochondria to produce ATP, the more likely your cells will be able to function very well and to give you that strength and that energy, that power to be able to function holistically. So I think there are many different things that you can do to be able to get more energy. Sometimes you need to spend more energy to get energy, like exercise.
Don't tell me that.
I know that bad E word, right? Exercise. Everyone
enough.
always rolls their eyes. And but even then, to get more energy, you got to exercise.
So you're building resilience, you're burning fat, and you're releasing dopamine, and you're doing all that sort of stuff.
You're clearing your head.
Right.
You're able to actually have clearer minds. Even fresh air and even like water is oftentimes we tend to think that water doesn't do anything, but water does a lot of things. And our body is actually made 70% of water. So we need to actually hydrate ourselves more rather than dehydrate it with caffeine consumption, for example. And whether it's through coffee or through tea or otherwise, like some of the energy drinks or some of the soft drinks also contain caffeine, like even Mountain Dew contains a level amount of caffeine too. So I think it comes back down to there are actually other ways to be able to gain energy, and it's not only just that you feel better, but you will look better.
Next thing you're going to tell me that I should be eating fruit and vegetables.
Well, we can have that conversation if you're open to it.
No, fair enough.
Well, you want to have the antioxidants. And people think, we've got antioxidants in coffee.
Right.
But there are also antioxidants in many different things that doesn't give any side effects.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I certainly did. If you'd like to read Christiana's article in full and get all the details and more, you can do so by heading over to our website, which is in the show notes below. If you're enjoying Science Radio, we'd really appreciate it if you give us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating, and if you leave us a review, we'll love you forever. It really does help out, and it's free. Aside from that, thank you again for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.